Laurie Huston's News for the Heart is dedicated to helping you give a voice to your own soul. Our hearts have the power to free us from pain and the struggles that keep us from awakening to our true essence. Join Laurie now as we delve into our heart and soul to find the path that will open us to the possibilities and lead us to the life we love to live.
Hey, and good afternoon. This is News for the Heart. And today I have Tom Campbell with me. Well, everybody knows that I adore having Tom on my show, and we've been having some very interesting conversations about virtual realities ever since I've gone to his immersive. It brought up just a lot of information, and since the last few shows, we've accumulated a few questions, so we're going to try and touch on some of them. We keep trying to touch on them, and so we'll continue. So if you have questions, just let us know, and we'll try and fit it in the best way that I can. If they're very science questions that probably aren't going to be answered here, but because I'm more for how to process the information that Tom does so that we can do it in a very practical and way that we can all evolve and move towards love. So with that said, hi, Tom.
Hi, Laurie.
All right. So we're going to start. People are very, I don't know. I think what happens is we're so many teachings out there, and although sometimes it's just a matter of the definition, because we have our own sort of definitions, but because there's so much information out there, people get rather attached to certain things. So we're going to talk about souls and individuated consciousness. You know, do we have choices? What's the difference? We have these, construct definitions of what we think soul and spirit and higher self, and technically these are all just tools or metaphors for us understanding the larger consciousness system, for understanding how we all sort of fit together. But people do kind of get attached to certain definitions and what they mean to them. So if we could sort of just share a little bit about soul's individuated consciousness, how we get to choose. I mean, some people thought, what if we come back as a dog? Does that mean we don't grow? There's a lot of thoughts and processing. And I think as an individuated consciousness, we could probably even separate out and be several different places at once, but I don't know how that all works. So why don't we try and tackle this one? And then we'll go to the next.
Okay. Well, you did ask just one real specific question there. So what if we come back as a dog? What does that do? Well, if you decide to come back as a dog, and you might ask, why would anybody want to do that? Well, there may be somebody you're particularly close to, and you might want to just interact with them again, just be close to them again. So you might want, and it be, it's difficult just if you want to do that and that person has a body, it's real difficult to do that if they don't happen to be just having a baby. And even then you'd be an infant and they'd be the adult, and it really wouldn't be that kind of a connection so much. So that kind of timing's difficult, but you could come back as a dog. If you knew that they were looking for a puppy, then you could probably come and then take that puppy, as your avatar, and that would be fine. Oh, that may be one reason why you might want to do that. But the question is, do you not evolve then? Well, you can evolve then, yes, because dogs make choices. Right. Dogs are not robots. They're conscious. They have choices to make, and by those choices, they evolve or de-evolve, just like us. Animals are different than us only in the amount of decision space they have. That is the quality and type and number of choices that they have. How many decisions can they make? How many choices do they have? Well, they don't have as many as we do, obviously. And because that decision space is small, then their choices are limited. Because their choices are limited, then their evolution is limited to within the choices they can make. You see, dogs don't have as much power to do damage in the world or to do good in the world because their choices are smaller. But that doesn't mean they don't have meaningful choices. They have a lot of meaningful choices. So they don't grow to the extent that we do. Their consciousness is the same as ours in the sense of the fundamentals of consciousness and what they're doing, but it's quite different in, let's say, its capacity and its, and with the things that it is dealing with in its growth. So yeah, it's not like you go backwards then. You wouldn't lose anything, but you wouldn't gain much either, other than the fact that you could make some real good doggy decisions. You'd be nice, you'd be polite, you'd help out, you'd care about others, you wouldn't be self-centered, all the same things that we have here. And there'll be a bunch of people that say, well, all dogs, are just love, and that's all dogs are. They don't have any other mode. And that's not true. Dogs act like that to people because people are their gods. People are, they are completely dependent on the people. Now, these are domestic dogs, not wild dogs, but they're completely dependent on the people for food, for shelter, for everything. And when you can imagine, let's say you were really dependent on some big human who was, 800 pounds and 9 feet tall. Okay. Or I guess even scale up more than that between a dog and a human, 20 feet tall. So there's great big humans and you were kept by them and you were fed by them and everything in your life that was necessary and important to you, they provided. Then would you be nasty to them? Would you stick out your tongue? Would you do things that weren't nice? No, you'd be very obsequious. You'd suck up. You'd be, you'd constantly be smiling. And even if they did things that annoyed you, you wouldn't act annoyed because they're big and they're in charge. People act to their boss like that. If you have a boss, particularly if your boss is one that is a micromanager and, is very demanding, doesn't let you just do things on your own, then everybody sucks up to the boss. And when the boss says, oh, no, don't do that, do this. Yes, we do it. And we smile. And we say, good idea, boss. Thank you. And we go on because that's the dynamics of the power relationship between the two. Now, you get a bunch of dogs together and watch them, and you will see some ego and you will see some not being too nice to each other. You will see that they have those same issues when they're working with a peer group. So dogs are not just little, creatures just full of love. They're creatures who know where their food comes from. And they have to evolve just like we do. It's not like they're done. They already got the love. They have a lot to learn and a lot of choices to make, whether to cooperate or not cooperate, whether to take care of, other dogs in their pack or whatever, or let them alone, whether to bully them, whether they really put a lot of emphasis on the hierarchy. I'm the big dog. I eat first. I get whatever I want. If you have a treat, I can take it away from you because I'm the big dog. Well, that's dog hierarchy. That's the way they live. That's the social dynamics if you're, a canine. But it's not necessarily low entropy. So, a dog that was growing up would learn to, they are aware of those instincts that are pack oriented and very hierarchical, but they wouldn't necessarily, push on them. They'd be polite, but they wouldn't push. It's like, what do you call people who are tough in the hierarchy? You say they kiss up and kick down. That means they kiss up to the boss and everybody that's above them, but they kick everybody below them because they can. So they wouldn't, and some dogs do that. Some dogs act that way, but they wouldn't have to. They have choices. Right. They can grow up within those limited set of choices within their limited decision space. So all consciousness is basically, in the most fundamental ways, is the same. It's here. It's making choices, and by those choices, it evolves and de-evolves, whether you're a dog or a bumblebee or a human or, a whale or whatever. It's all the same. If you're conscious, then that's what you're doing here.
Right.
So consciousness comes at all sorts of levels and capacities. So there's a little, IUOC and a little free will awareness unit, that is logged on to that puppy is its avatar. Or if there's really not a lot of action going on, say at a lower level with, with bees or insects or something, maybe there is one free will awareness unit for a whole hive, but still there is a piece of consciousness that is making choices for everything that's conscious. And my definition of what's conscious is something that has a non-zero decision space. If it just makes 2 or 3 choices and that's all it makes, which would maybe be some sort of insect, then still those are conscious choices, and it's a consciousness doing that. And if those choices have any kind of ethical or moral value, like it certainly does for dogs, like I say, they can push hard down that hierarchy, or they can just take a soft touch and let it go. Then, if it has those kinds of moral choices and ethical choices, then they would definitely have a consciousness that would want to play that to make those ethical choices. If the choices are really not ethical, they're just maybe some choices that it has, and I don't know, maybe bumblebees are like that. Maybe they don't have a whole lot of choices, but if they have some, and no doubt they do, we understand more and more about insects and other things, and we find out their lives are really a whole lot more complex and complicated than we thought. Typically, when we get into a critter of some sort, we find they have all kinds of ways of interacting that we weren't aware of. So their life is probably pretty rich in choices as well, just not choices like ours. So their consciousness is not like ours. So that's the thing about, what consciousness is. And when we talk about my model, I guess I should explain that things like the larger consciousness system, is an information system. It's a digital information system. That's a metaphor. Things like IUOCs, individuated units of consciousness, and free will awareness units. The individuated unit of consciousness is the chunk of consciousness that keeps accumulating all the various experience packets, which other people would call incarnations. So it's accumulating all of those, and it's the thing negotiating the next incarnation. And then the free will awareness unit is the thing that actually is the piece of consciousness that is attached to the avatar. It's logged on to play a particular avatar. And that free will awareness unit is just a subset of that individuated unit of consciousness. And that's sort of the way my model works. But all those things are metaphors. And the reason I say that is when I made my model, the way I made it is that after, say, 35, 40 years of doing experiments and research in consciousness, I had a set of facts, not theories, not assumptions, but facts, things that I had done in consciousness. Change a variable, do it again, change a variable, do it again, do it 100 times, see if the answer ever changes, and that kind of stuff. And you eventually come up with some facts that are, the things I found to be true in consciousness. And I had that set of facts. And then I had all the facts as a physicist. And we get those facts the same way. We look at things, then we do experiments and we change a variable and we do it again and, do it again. And eventually we build up a bunch of facts in science through experimentation. So I had these 2 sets of facts, the ones in consciousness, the ones in the physical world. And I was looking for a theory, some set of ideas that would unify all those facts. One set of ideas that would explain all the facts. So I knew that consciousness was fundamental and that the physical world was not fundamental. That some of the facts of consciousness, that I learned, that's just a fact. Now, so I started with consciousness, figured that was the fundamental thing. Once you get that, the physics and the physical world ought to fall out of that, which of course it did fall out of that. But it's a very abstract thing, consciousness, intent, decision space. These are all abstract things. So in order to talk about them, in order to have a conversation about them, to present a model, every fundamental fact or chunk of consciousness I gave it a name. So I start with the big thing, and that's the larger conscious system. And because consciousness is really about information, it's an information system. And because digital is the most fundamental way of dealing with information, then it's a digital information system. So we just keep working out the logic. And my plan was to not add anything that wasn't necessary to explain the facts. Okay. So I needed a free will awareness unit. I needed a IUOC because these all had to be there to explain facts. But I'm making these things up because they stand for a logical thing in consciousness. It's a fact. It's a logical part of consciousness that had to be there. So that's why I say this model is all about metaphors that allow us to discuss it. And I didn't add things to it. For instance, that free will, that individuated unit of consciousness, that was the collector function, the collector of all the incarnations. Incarnations were a fact. They were necessary. They were logically necessary. The model can't work without that. So it's not like I added that because I thought that was a cool idea, and it was in Eastern theology or something. I added that because consciousness required that. The system required that as to work. Otherwise, it falls down. The system can't go anywhere. It can't evolve. It can't move forward because of the nature of consciousness. So in any case, that was the way the model works. So I had somebody just in this last immersive that I did that says, well, what about this individuated units of consciousness? Does it do this or this or that? And how is it connected to, the other thing? And what does it do all day at the office? What is it, what is all its functions? Okay, it's the collector function, but while that free will awareness unit is off doing its thing as I, logged on to the avatar, what's it doing? And I said that you're taking my metaphor too far. Metaphors only run so deep, right? You make a metaphor to explain a point, but you can't squeeze more out of it than that. And because I didn't have any logical necessity to make that function of the IUC do anything else other than accumulate, then I didn't add things to it. I didn't say, oh yeah, well, while it's accumulating, it's talking to all the other IUCs, coming up on better ways to sort the data and that. I could have said those sorts of things, but I don't because they're not logically necessary. It doesn't mean that they couldn't happen. It just means they're not logically necessary. If they're not logically necessary, then you don't want to go there because that means it is conjecture. It's not fact. It's not in the logical path of facts. So everything in my model is there because it has to be, because if it wasn't, the whole system wouldn't work. Nothing's in there because it felt good and sounded good. It's only in there if it's a necessary part of the logical flow. So in that way, I keep it simple. I don't add a lot of things with conjecture. So everything is just all the fundamentals and no window dressing, nothing to fluff it up and add conjecture to it. And that is why it is, we say, I have people come up to me all the time and say, Tom, are you a Tibetan Buddhist? And I'll say, no, I know a little bit about it, but no, that's not where I come from. Tom, are you a Kabbalist? Oh, you must have studied, the Hopi ways with the, and I get all of this stuff from all, I'm a Sufi, I'm this and that, because people who study those things say that what I'm telling them is very much like, and is very much in agreement with all these other mystical traditions. And I didn't start as mystical tradition. I started as science. I started from a place of facts, and building a model out of them. So, a lot of these traditions, though, have filled in all these points that are basically conjecture. They're not necessary. So they have things in them that go to a lot more detail, like the chakras. Okay, Hinduism has chakras. Okay, so that's a thing they filled in. So those chakras are not fundamental. Those chakras don't really exist as things. They're tools. They're just a way of looking at the data. So if we don't break the data down into pieces, it's real hard to talk about it. it's real hard to have conversations about it. So people find it helpful to take the information and break it down into subsets that then they can discuss without having to just discuss the whole thing all at once. It makes it easier. So somebody made up the thing about chakras, and it seemed to fit the bill. It was easy to teach. Other people understood it, so it became a very useful tool. But it's not, it's not something that's fundamental. The Zen Buddhists don't have chakras. Does that mean they're wrong? The Zen Buddhists just don't get it because they never figured out chakras? No, of course not. The only people that have chakras are the Hindus. Nobody else has chakra system. Oh, then the Hindus, figured it all out and everybody else hasn't yet. It's not like that. Or the Hindus are wrong because nobody else, sees those things like that. No, that's not it either. The Hindus have found a very useful tool set in explaining things to other people, and other people find it very useful in order to take that knowledge and put it in pigeonholes, give specific things, specific meaning, and that makes it easier for them to understand. We as humans don't like dealing with things that are real abstract. We can't get our hands on them. It's hard to talk about them. We like to take those abstract things and turn them into something more physical, more concrete. So if these chakras were just abstractions, which is probably what they were in the beginning, it would have been better, but still wouldn't have been as useful until somebody made them pieces of the body. Somebody attached them to the body. You see, now that's concrete. Because it's attached to your body, now you can feel like, all right, I got this chakra, and I got one here, and I got one here, and I got the crown chakra, and here's all the things they do. Because it's part of your body now, it's like it's more fundamental. Just like the term going out of body. Your consciousness isn't in your body. Nothing goes out of body, but people have this need to turn abstract things into physical things. So if there's, consciousness can exist elsewhere, then that making it physical is like, well, it's some kind of ectoplasm that, lives in your body and it sneaks out the top of your head when you get in a right kind of mental space. That's just not true. It doesn't work that way, but it's a metaphor. So out of body is just another metaphor. So there's lots of metaphors in this. And the fact that the MBT model seems to be inclusive of all the other models, all the other major areas of, I guess, what's called mystical, thinking. Mystical means it's not basically materialistic. That's what mystical really means. It's not a materialistic thing. Then that's because I only hit the fundamentals. These fundamentals apply to all of them. So if you're into Sufi, or you're into Kabbalah, or you're into Buddhism or anything else, you'll find that MBT covers all the fundamentals. And where MBT doesn't talk about things like chakras, it's because they're not fundamental. They are just tool sets that we make to understand these things. So calling something a tool set isn't something that makes it smaller or lesser, or, oh, it's not real, it's just a tool set. That's the wrong attitude. Tool sets are things we need in order to break things down to the point that we humans have an ability to wrap our minds around it, and it's something more concrete. That's why these tools are almost always body-centered. They always have something to do with our body, and that's because that's concrete, and we can relate to that. So that's that's kind of the thing about my model. So I tell people, don't believe anything I tell you, because if it's not your own experience, it's not your truth. And if it's not your truth, it doesn't do you any good to believe it. So if you have beliefs that are very different, that the MBT doesn't support, it's not, well, throw those beliefs away, you're wrong. That's not the right idea. That's not where I'm coming from. The idea is, here's a model that you can hang your experience on. All the things you've experienced in the physical and in the non-physical, this is a model that will explain those. Now, if you want to, go other places, or, follow conjecture or some other sorts of things, it doesn't mean those things aren't useful. They're just tools that have made things more understandable to people, ways of explaining, ways of teaching, and that makes them valuable. It doesn't make them wrong, you know, and it doesn't even make them unnecessary, because without those tools, many people couldn't grasp the concepts. It's the tools that make it concrete enough for most humans to grasp it with their very concrete minds. We're concrete, we think that way because we live in this virtual reality that makes everything physical. So if things are kind of physical-like, then we feel better. It's not so hard for us to get our mind wrapped around it. So tools are significant, tools are valuable, tools are important, and for humans, they're necessary. So this idea that, oh, it's just a tool, somehow that degrades it and makes it, not functional or not good, that's wrong. Tools are invaluable. We humans couldn't get along without them. We can't think in big abstract globs. We can't talk in big abstract globs. Our speech, our language has evolved to describe the physical world. It doesn't have the ideas, the concepts, the vocabulary or anything to deal with things other than the physical world, because that's what it evolved to describe. So the language isn't any good at doing anything other than that. So all of the stuff that is more abstract than that has to be broken down into pieces that look kind of physical so that we can talk about them, but it doesn't mean that's what they actually are. So that's kind of the breakdown between, things being tools. Oh, that's just a tool set. Yeah, those chakras are just tools, things somebody made up, and because they were valuable and they worked and they helped and people got a lot out of them, then they got passed around and lots of people used them. And that's that's one of the tool sets that Hinduism has used to teach people about what is otherwise very abstract and very hard to get your hands around. And other systems have other ways of doing that. Now, in my way of thinking, tools should be as simple as possible, because the simpler and more straightforward the tool, the less arbitrariness there is in it, the less conjecture there is in it. Just build the tool to do what it has to do and don't embellish it. But through the centuries, people have embellished the tools, and the tools have grown all kinds of frills and, and things on them that are unnecessary to the functioning of the tool. And that sort of thing then is just, not particularly useful. And people get all wrapped up into those, extraneous things that have been added to the tools, and they'll get, a lot of beliefs will get attached to that. A lot of dogma gets attached to that. And it's just not necessary in order to understand the bigger picture and understand everything that happens to you in your subjective world and everything that happens to you in your objective world. You don't need those extraneous frills and things added on. But somebody thought of it and it seemed like a good idea, so they say it, and then other people say it, and pretty soon you get, tens of thousands of people who are invested in the frills and additional add-ons that people put to their tools just because they like it. It feels good. They think it's good. So tools are better when they're simple, when they just do what they have to do and no more. And all of the tools all the metaphors that I come up with are just simple. So when somebody says, well, what do those IUCs do all day at the office? Because they're just there, collecting these various lifetimes. So what are they doing between lifetimes? They're sitting around sucking their thumb, what are they doing? And I say, well, that's not a good question. That IUOC is just a metaphor for the collection part, because that's a necessary part. Anything else is not necessary for the system to work. Doesn't mean it isn't, it doesn't mean they don't have anything to do. It just means we could make stuff up, but we're making it up, you see? And we could even make stuff up that sounded reasonable, but again, we're making it up. It's us creating something that isn't really logical or necessary. So my model is the bare bones, what is logically necessary to understand, and all the rest of it is not that different. So when they compare me to the Sufis or to the indigenous people, who've been around for thousands of years and have cultures that have a mystical component to them, then as far as all the fundamental things go, we just match really well. But then they have this other stuff that is kind of unique to them. And often the problem with tools is that they can be very limiting. They can help you, but they also add limitations as well. Because if you have a tool, you make a metaphor, and that metaphor comes with its own limits. It's a very limiting thing. So you may have a shaman, and he can become a wolf and run through the woods. Well, or maybe he can become a bear or something else and run through the woods. Well, that's fine, and that enables him to go places and see things that he otherwise wouldn't do. And
getting darker here.
Yeah, I see that. It's just getting a little darker there. That allow him to do a few things, but that's a very specific thing. You see, he can be an animal of some sort. He can maybe fly and see things. But if he just let go of the fact that it had to do with those animals and that he was a part of that animal, he could realize that he could remote view, or he could see all sorts of things. He could see, not just things where the animals are, through animal eyes, but, he could look at the backside of the moon and see what's going on in Alpha Centauri too. Or, there's lots of other things he could do with that basic quality. But because he has tools where he gets to attach to an animal, then that helps him do that. But it also limits him because his tool is attaching to an animal, you see. So every time you make a tool, it comes with, it may offer you an ability, but it also comes with a limitation.
Well,
so
not
that's
only
why
that,
the tools need to be simple.
Yeah, and we have our own way of seeing the world. So a tool is great when we're open and allowing, but a lot of times we have healthy skepticism. We have, there's somebody will say, oh, it didn't work for me. So then there's doubt being placed. It all has to do with, I guess, how we identify with ourselves, but also, there's so much more to what we see, which is, I guess, part of, I don't know if that's the limitation or not, but, some people believe in magic. So, that the connection between the mind, body, and spirit, or mind, heart, and soul, or wherever you want to go. And so however you see that, but, we can look at allopathic medicine, and for a lot of people, that works for them. And then there's a lot of other people where they'll say, no, it doesn't work for me. So we have to have the intention, the belief, we have to have the trust. There's so many things that are incorporated. And of course, all of that has to do with our fears, which is what stops them from actually doing the work that could be easily shifted. It's just because of our fears, we'll have doubt, or we won't think it's going to work for us because we're not worthy. And so then all of that also comes into play, which is, I think, part of the problem of our limitations.
Sure. Well, the problem with tools is that people begin to make their tools facts, to make their tools sacred, to make their tools, that. And as long as they see them as tools, these are things that help me understand, then fine. Tools are wonderful. But when you start to believe in your tools, believe that they are the only correct way, and that every other way is wrong and not, and not any good, and so on, then you've just trapped yourself into a very limited understanding. See, most of those tools, and a lot of the ones you mentioned, are the way they work is by the fact that intent modifies probability, future probability. That's how they're working. So if you have a tool set that helps you focus your intent in a way that's powerful, then you will find that things will happen, and that tool will be effective. And that's where you talk about, well, you believe in the tool, and it's not so much that you believe in it, other than that you understand it. It's a tool that helps me, focus my intent on something. It's the intent that's the active ingredient. The tool's just a tool. The tool's not an active ingredient, which is why those people who really are into their tools, they work for them. And the people who say, oh, that's nonsense, that doesn't make any sense, then that tool does not work for them. Because for the set that it works for, it is effective in helping them focus their intent, which is really what's going on. That's the thing that makes the difference. And for those that are scornful of the tool, it doesn't help them focus their intent to do anything, so it doesn't work for them. But again, it shouldn't be a matter of belief. Yes, you should be skeptical of everything, and you should realize that tools are tools, and they're very useful. And once you make it's not like if you have a screwdriver for driving in certain kinds of screws, say screws that have little star heads on them or something else, well, it's a very useful tool. And you use that to do that, and it'll work every time you use it to do it. But the tool is not magical. The tool isn't, it can do some things, but it's restrictive. That screwdriver won't work on, some other kind of, on a screw with a slot head, and it won't work as a hammer, and it's no good to pry boards loose. It's just a tool that works, and it helps you do a specific thing. And that's the way these mental tools are. They'll help you focus your intent. And focusing your intent, focusing that consciousness on something, that's what really works. And if you've got a crystal for your tool, or if you've got, a statue of Buddha for your tool, or if you've got the cross, or if you've got any other kinds of tools that you might have, you may sit down and, in your lotus position and put some incense, burning and all these things, say your mantra. Mantras are tools. All these things are tools just to help you focus your intent. But eventually, if you have lots of tools and the tools are complicated, you're spending lots and lots of minutes on tool use. And better to get a more direct, simple set of tools that allows you to do a lot more in less time. So that's why I say tools should always be the minimum set. You don't want to aggrandize or make them, bigger and fluffier and whatever, unless you need that. If you need that, then make them that. You just realize that they're tools, and don't have the idea that, oh, it's just a tool, so it's not really true. That's not the case. What's true, what actually is, what is real is information. Nothing's more real than information. That tool is just another way to configure information to help you focus your intent. So that's what's going on. And that's why some people use tools and it works. Some people, use the same tool and it doesn't work. It's not the tool that makes it work or not work. It's the intent that makes it work or not work. So those people who, say, oh, there is no such thing as intuition, that all that is just people guessing, and that's a lot of nonsense and so on. Well, they don't have much of an intuition because they've never actually honed that tool to be useful. So that's why they say there is none, because they can't see one, because they don't have one, because they never developed that, those tool sets, those skills. So it's like that. The people who think that all of the paranormal things, all the things that you might say is spiritual and so on, and all of that is just so much belief-based baloney, and none of that really exists or real, are just people who can't access or experience any of it because their denial of it cuts them off from their ability to use it or to do it. You give these guys that go out and find water with their dowsing rods, well, they're very successful. Mm-hmm. They work, but that rod is just a tool. That rod does not have any physical connection to the water. It's not like that rod is some mystical thing that somehow senses water under the ground. It's not like that, although people believe in their tools. Their intention is to find water. and that little dowsing rod is their tool. That's their output format. When that rod quivers or jumps or gets hot or whatever it is they want it to do, then that's where the water is. Well, they're getting that information out of a database. It's not that that little rod that they're using is somehow communicating to the water underground. Their intent is to find the water. And you'll notice that when they use that dowsing tool, they're quiet. They're not talking. They're not walking around with that tool while they're having a conversation or talking on the phone. That's because it doesn't work then. That's because the tool is really not the thing that's working. It's their intent that's working, and they need a quiet space where they kind of get into the zone. And when they're in that zone, then their little divining rod does great for finding water under the ground. But it won't work if they're not focused properly, you see, because it's the focus that allows them to get the data out of the databases, not the little, willow switch or the little, whatever it is, wishbone thing that they're using. The tool is their intent, but that dowsing rod is their physical thing that helps them focus their intent on finding the water. But it's that belief that you have this rod and it can find water keeps you from finding all kinds of other things. That database tells you where everything is, you see. But, this is only good for finding water. Well, that's just a belief. Otherwise, you could find other things like your lost car keys. You could find all kinds of things otherwise. But because we have a belief and this is how it works, and it has to be made out of this material, and you hold it just like this, you have to hold it just the right way, then it'll work and you can find water. It works, but it's very limiting. Can't do much else. All it does is find water. Whereas the act of finding water is getting data out of a database that has where everything else is as well. It's, that's why I say tools come with their limitations. Same with the chakras, same with everything else. All the other tools we have, they come with limitations. Get rid of those limitations and suddenly it's a different world. All kinds of things are possible that weren't possible before.
Okay. So, not exactly sure how to go through this without it making sound. Let's just try. So one of the questions around, I guess, poverty, or that there are certain areas that don't have, running water, and, there's lots of people that die from hunger, and, and we can go on and on about, young kids dying. I mean, I guess some of it, for some people, they want to know what they can do. For other people, it's, how does it affect them, or what does it, it's always about our choices. But, are we supposed to ignore certain things that are happening, like the environment, or starving children, or, that kind of thing? Like, how do we make choices that affect? Is it just for, most of the work that we do is about our own fears, and working through those and facing them and lowering our entropy. But what do we do about the stuff that's outside? Do we ignore it? Do we, some people get so caught up in it, though, that they get angry and they're frustrated, and that anger comes out, and it shifts how people see it, and then people just get frustrated with those type of people because they're not really helping. They're just pointing out more fear-based stuff.
Right.
Well, how do we get around that so that it's all about, lowering our entropy and
the thing we need to do is that first step is that a person works on themselves, get rid of their fear, because until they do that, they're just not very helpful doing anything else. So that's first step. Get rid of your own fear. Now, after you've gotten that fear down to a point that you can actually be more useful to other people because you're not so full of fear, then the next thing to work on is being kind, being caring, having empathy, others, building up your relationship to others, or caring about others. As you work on that, the next step up is you become a teacher. You're main point of your life is to help other people get rid of their fear. You see, so we kind of go up in steps. But at first, if you're full of fear, you just got to clear that up first, because otherwise you're out there trying to help people and you're so full of fear that you become part of the problem rather than part of the solution. You see, so you got to work on yourself first before you can do much of the rest of it. And if you get that out of sequence, if you get that cart in front of the horse instead of behind the horse, it doesn't work too well. And that's what some people do who get so enraged and so upset about the awful world we live in. They haven't grown up enough that they are not self-focused and self-centered. They still have a lot of ego. And that ego really wants to be the world the way they want it. Like, this world isn't right. I know it isn't right. It's not the way I want it. It's not the world I want to live in. And, it just is, and that upsets them because it's not the way they want it. It's not the right way. It's not the way it should be. People should be nicer to each other. They should be kinder. They should have more empathy. They should care. And they don't. And that just, makes me angry that they don't. Well, the anger comes from their ego. If they didn't have the ego, they wouldn't get angry. So they're having the empathy, but they still have a lot of ego. So that empathy turns into anger. And just like I said before, they've gone from part of the solution to part of the problem. Having empathy is part of the solution. But because they're not grown up enough yet to really implement that as part of a solution, they turn around and end up with a lot of anger, which then, they're fearful. Oh, these awful people, they're doing awful things to us. It's a terrible thing. And all of that turns into fear. It's the fear of the big thing out there that's ugly is going to get you, and it's always pushing you around and it's always making you do things you don't want to do, and it's so unreasonable. And you take everything that's happening in the world personally, because actually, personally, you believe that you are the center of the universe. And as you being the center of the universe, it's just upsetting that the universe isn't the way you want it. You see, that's the problem. So when you get these things out of sequence to where you've got a lot of ego, you got a lot of self-centeredness, and you also have the empathy, well, it's a problem. And you become part of the problem again, because that stuff is fear-based. Oh, these awful people, they're always getting us. They're not good. We need to get rid of them. They are the problem. And that helps you miss the fact that they aren't the problem. You are the problem. Your choices are the problem. When you choose to be angry rather than choose to be helpful, you're part of the problem. Okay. And they say, well, I'm just a little person and I can't do anything. And there's all these big things out there going on and that are terrible. And there's no way I can change them. Yes. Though you think you are the center of the universe, you really have no power. And, though you are self-centered, you can't control things. Well, that's part of, that's part of growing up, is to realize you don't control things. You have to accept things. Things are the way they are. People are the way they are. And if that makes you angry, that's just because you get too much ego. That shouldn't make you angry. Now, that can make you sad. That's okay. You can say, wow, it's really too bad that, we're like that. But you need to be positive, because being negative and being fearful is part of the problem. And if all the stuff out there makes you negative, you're negative about, all the institutions that are making your world miserable, then you become part of the problem. More fear, more negativity. That indeed helps future probability produce more fear and more negativity, because you're negative. Your intent modifies future probability. And if you're negative and you're fearful, you're going to get a more fear-inducing negative future. You're part of the problem. And the better way, the more grown-up way to look at it is, most of the people out there are doing the best they can with what they've got. And when I say what they've got, what they came in with. You come in from the last incarnation or the last experience packet with a certain amount of entropy, a certain amount of love versus fear. And that's then what you start with in the next incarnation. And hopefully in that incarnation, you get rid of some fear, get a little more love. And then the next incarnation after that, you'll come in at a little higher level of evolution. So that's the cumulative function. That's what enables the whole system to go someplace and not just sit and chase its tail forever. So as you get a little more grown up, you have more empathy for people, not just the people you like and the people who are doing the things that you would like them to do, but for everybody. And you realize that everybody, for the most part, is doing the best they can with what they come in with. They've only come in with a certain quality of consciousness, and they're acting out their choices at about that level. Hopefully, they're making us a few better choices that will move them up a little, but they can also make some bad choices that move them down a little. It's just, that's the nature. You can evolve and you can de-evolve. And when you see that, then it's easier to have compassion for them. They're struggling. They're doing what they think they have to do. They're doing what they think feels necessary to them. They're on that path, and by being on that path, they are a reflection of who they are and what they are. They're working at their level, and they will grow up, or they will evolve or de-evolve just like all the rest of us. So then, instead of being angry with them, you can have some compassion for them and realize they just are who they are and accept them that way. That doesn't mean you need to like what they're doing and just accept all the things that they're doing. No, you should get involved. It's important to help educate. It's important to help people understand what's going on here, that there's a better way, that we don't have to do that, but come up with alternatives, come up with suggestions, come up with things that you can help, be a part of the educational process. And if you can't figure out how to do that, then still the biggest contribution you can make to it is to just change yourself. Get rid of your own fear. And if you do that, that's really going to be bigger help than even if you go out and try to educate people to a better way. I mean, educating people to a better way is a good thing. It's not that you just ignore everything, and crawl in your little hole and, and live in your own space and ignore it. No, you shouldn't ignore it. You should be aware of it. But the maximum contribution you can make to it is to get rid of your own fear so that you stop becoming part of that problem, that you become part of the solution. And if we had enough people who were part of the solution, the problem would just go away on its own. The problem there is us. We're the problem. It's all the anger. It's all the negativity. It's all the fear. That's the problem. And if you happen to be the CEO of a big company that's just trying to get profits, even if it means that you're lying, cheating, and stealing, well, that's how you are then able to express the quality of your consciousness in those choices. Well, conscious quality isn't very good. But let's say you don't have that kind of power. You're just somebody who goes out, digs in a hole with a shovel, and comes home. But you're frustrated and you're unhappy and you see the world sucks. So, you're short with your children, you're snappy with your wife, and you slap the dog. Well, that's about all the power you have. And if you take that guy who doesn't have any power and put him up in that executive position, he'll do about the same thing that executive's doing. He will take his low quality of consciousness that leads him to snap at the kids and, slap the dog. Instead, he'll be lying, cheating, stealing on a scale that affects millions of people. It's not that guy is much different than the rest of us. Matter of fact, he represents us. We're like that. We generally have a low quality of consciousness. So if what you do, you're down at the bottom of the pile of power, you don't have much power. All you can do is, go do what your boss says every day so you can make enough money to pay the rent. You don't have a whole lot of power. So you feel, angry the rest of the world because it's not the way it should be. And you feel negative and you feel fearful about the things and the systems and the corporations that are going to get you, then you're part of the problem. You perpetrate it. And That's just not helpful at all. So I would say to those people, yes, this world is in many ways, a horrible place to be because we have so many low quality people in it, low quality of consciousness people in it. But that's us. That's who we are. Accept that and let's grow ourselves up, because as we grow up, then there's one less negative, person in the world. There's one less person who's full of fear and hate and, nastiness. And that's how you do it, one person at a time, because you can't make anybody else grow up. So the only thing you can really do about, having us grow up is make yourself grow up. And in general, there's a lot of growing to do. If you look at it, you've got a lot of work to do there. There's a lot of growing to do. And as we change, our institutions will change because they reflect us. If the population was a kinder, gentler population that really cared about people and, about optimizing, our resources for everybody and that sort of thing, if that's the way we really felt, then that's what we'd have. All those institutions act the way they do because we allow it, because we condone it. And it's the same way we are for the most part. It's you don't want to add to it.
And fear is literally trying to control us. A lot of experts out there that, shovel out their fear doesn't help us. So when we move to let go of our own fears and we see our world as when we start growing up, we won't even connect with some of those people that are spewing fear all the time. Those are our choices too, right? Whether we want to listen to somebody all the time. Some people pick things like politics and then they get stuck in it. And then, every tweet that they do, every, post that they have is just full of more and more anger and more fear. And so this is where we have our choices. We can either focus on all the problems that are out there, which a lot of people do, and see how, we're just victims and we can't change anything and we can't do anything. But if we could see that that's just adding to it, like you say, the problem, then we can shift it towards seeing everything differently. And it really only takes one person to make huge changes especially in your own world. But imagine when everybody starts making those changes. It's kind of like the meditation experiments that they've done, and how much things can shift if everybody has their intent to focus on love instead of always focusing on the fears. If you watch the news, if you any of the things, all the social media out there, it's just so full of fear that if we just keep focusing on that, then we're not growing up. We're not making the choices.
No, when you get trapped in those negative cycles, that generally things just get worse and worse. And because you're negative, let's say politics is a thing, and you get all wound up in it, well, then you have a tendency to see the people who don't agree with you as stupid idiots,
right.
Which is just arrogance, right?
Yeah.
And you have a tendency to see yourself, very self-righteously. See, all of that is just sinking deeper and deeper into fear and self-centeredness, and you being the good guy and the other people all being the bad guys.
Yes.
Instead of looking at it that way, you need to see all of us are in this thing together. The best thing you can do is get fear and negativity out of yourself, and it's not ignore it.
Right.
See, that's not the other thing. It's not like, well, if you had a heart and a conscience, you couldn't ignore it. If you had a heart and a conscience, you'd be angry too. No, only if you had a low quality of consciousness would you be angry too. But of course you have a heart. Of course you see all the horrible things that are going on. Of course you have empathy with people who are having a really, really hard time. But you have to realize that is the way we are. That is the state of the evolution, conscious evolution of the human being here in this virtual reality. And there isn't any way that you can change that. Even if you were the center of the universe and you could reach in and take that nasty CEO or that nasty dictator and just get rid of them. You know, you had your own little private assassination squad that could go out and get rid of all the people that you didn't like. You see, it wouldn't change anything. It would just make everything worse, because that person would be replaced by somebody very similar. Sure. That's the nature of our system. And even if you could hand pick a really nice, good person to be in that spot, so, you know, you're the dictator of the world, and you can say, oh, there's a nasty dictator and there's a nasty CEO. We're just going to get rid of those people. My hit squad will take them out, and here are some really great people, and I'll put them in there instead. Well, those great people would maybe make a difference for their lifetime, for a few years till they retired, till somebody else bumped them off because they were in the way of somebody else's power stream. They would make a difference for a short time, and then it would go right back to the way it was if the population hadn't changed. And that's an obvious truth, because look at the world. Look how we've been over the last, 300 or 400 years. Has it changed much? Has, self-centeredness and, it's all about me and what I want and what I can get and power. It's still about power. It's still about force. It's still about greed. And it has been. You see, yeah, we're getting kinder and we're getting gentler in small ways, but we don't see any big, we see this slow growth because there are more people who are getting rid of their fear. So we are growing up because of that. But we don't, we've seen any number of evil people been supplanted by somebody a lot better. And we see that it doesn't really matter in the long term. If the society, if the people can't support it, it goes right back to the way it was. So even if you were the master of the universe, it wouldn't do you any good just to replace the people that you think are the problem. Those positions, those people would just be replaced by other people trying to do the same thing, because you're trying to fix a symptom, not fix the problem. The problem is low quality of consciousness. The symptom is bad behavior. You see, that's the thing. So you can work and work and work on fixing that symptom, and it's not it doesn't pay off in the long run. But if you just put a little effort into fixing the problem, starting with yourself, then perhaps, in decades or centuries, we could change all this stuff. So we put all our effort and our focus into doing something that's only marginally useful in a temporary sense, because it's symptom relief. And the other thing that is a problem here with individuals who aren't grown up yet, getting their empathy ahead, that empathy horse, behind the cart, is that the fact that they are victims, that they are helpless, little people down at the bottom that can't do anything, and that adds to their rage, you see. Well, as soon as you get in the victim space, what you're doing is saying, I'm not at fault, they're at fault. None of this is my responsibility, it's all their responsibility. And that's just not true. Your responsibility is to get rid of your fear, get rid of your ego, get rid of your beliefs, and become part of the solution. That's your responsibility. And if you're just pointing your hands and being fearful and trying to encourage other people to be fearful and angry too, you are part of the problem, and that's being irresponsible. So it helps them point a finger to somebody else and escape all blame themselves. Well, there's nothing I can do. See, if you can come to that conclusion, then you can feel, like you're not part of the problem, but you really are. So that idea, we see that a lot in our society. Being a victim is kind of it's always been, I guess, an in thing. That's the way you get out of being responsible. If you're a victim, then you're not responsible for anything. It's just this world just does this stuff to you, and you're just a poor, helpless and hapless victim down at the bottom of the barrel, and nothing you can do. And that makes people feel better. And because they're clean, they feel better. They're not part of the problem. Then they get self-righteous, and then they get angry, and they have all this stuff that is just not helpful. So being a victim is giving up your power. Victims have no power. They're powerless. And the only thing they get for it is they can pretend that they're also blameless, but they're not. They're just part of the problem. So you got to stop feeling sorry for yourself, accept the fact that you do not control the world, accept that the world is just the way it is because people are just the way they are, and then try to do the best you can to help that situation by getting rid of your own fear and ego and beliefs. And anger is not a part of that. If you have any negative feelings, anger, think other people are, you blame others. If you feel stressed, if you feel anxious, if you feel, miserable, if you feel, if you have all the negative feelings, you feel unappreciated, you feel, I don't know, undervalued, whatever it is, all that stuff's negative. And as long as you feel that stuff, that's your ego, that's your fear. If you didn't have the fear, you wouldn't feel that way. You'd look out at this world and say, oh boy, this place really needs to grow up. There's a lot of horrific things. Look at how those people are suffering, at the hands of these other people. That's so sad. And you'd have that sense of the sadness of it, but you would not be miserable. It wouldn't make you angry. It wouldn't make you unhappy. It would make you redouble your efforts to get rid of your own fear and become part of the solution, not double your fear and your anger to become, make the problem worse. So yeah, that's what I say. And I get that a lot. A lot of people says, well, if the larger conscious system allows this kind of meanness to go on, then it's a terrible system. It's not the system. The system it's not the system playing with its pet people out on a board and it allows things to go on. It's us and our choices. That's somebody that's trying to not only be a victim, but doesn't want to take any responsibility. Oh, it's something else. It's the evil consciousness system or the evil God that makes all, that allows all this to go on. It ought to just force everybody to be nice. Well, if you force people to be nice, they don't learn anything. They're not really nice. They're just behaving nicely, which may feel better in the short term, but it doesn't solve the problem. They're not growing up. They're not becoming. They don't really care about people. They're just behaving nice. It's like the difference between, being kind and acting kind. Anybody can act kind. All kinds of people that have very negative attitudes will smile and, act friendly and be kind and be nice and be courteous and so on. But that's because they're hiding something. They're not really kind, they're manipulative. So acting kind, it's a little civilizing, but it's not on your way to growing up. Being kind is what's important. And it's the same with everything else. So it's all of these things. We want people to be that way. Just instilling behavior or forcing somebody to act a way is even worse than not helpful, because when you force people to be ways they're not, that stuff inside of them that's still there just gets worse and worse and worse. It sits there and festers. And then when they have a chance, well, then, it all blows up in a big way, as we've seen in this country where we thought we had pretty well gotten rid of the racist problem, but we didn't realize what a festering, underbelly, that was going on there in the society until it got a chance to express itself, and then all kinds of ugliness comes pouring out that you didn't know was there. So it's much better for people to be authentic and be who they are. That way we can see things like that. But just having everybody act nice and be polite when inside they're not isn't helpful, because after a few decades of stuffing it down, you're even worse off than you were otherwise. So it isn't helpful to just make people be nice. That's not the point. They have to grow up, you see. It's not, you can't force it. Oh, let's make laws where everybody has to be nice. And we'll have so many laws that if anybody does anything that's not nice, we'll throw them in the slammer and leave them there. So everybody will have to be nice. That won't solve the problem. That just won't solve the problem. They have to change and become nice. They have to become high quality, not just act like it. So more laws won't fix the problem. It's an attempt to fix the symptom, But in general, when you have more and more laws, you also start aggravating people because those laws don't just fit people in their situations. Those laws, you know, are irritating as well. People don't like being legislated through their life. You know, they want to make their own choices in their own way. And now you've created another problem. So in an attempt to solve a problem, you create another problem that's just as bad, if not worse. Every time you try to force behavior through legal means or through pressure or political pressure or any other way. So that's the problem with force. It doesn't work. It's worse than not doing anything. So the idea that if you were the master of the world, you could force everybody to be nice wouldn't help at all. One day when you weren't looking, it would all explode and all that niceness would go away. So we have to be nice, be kind, be loving, be empathetic, not just act that way. Yeah. In some circles, it gets to be it's sort of the thing, the in thing to be a part of that circle is to be angry. You know, angry about the environment, angry about, you know, the corporations, angry about the, you know, the the aliens, you know, angry about whatever it is there is to be angry about. But that becomes kind of a cultural thing, which is sad because then that pulls more people into that dysfunctional pot of being part of the problem. And, you know, all these conspiracy theories that we have out there, and it's all fear, fear, fear. All these awful things are going to happen. Watch out. These awful people are doing awful things to us. And it just creates fear, which just adds to the difficulty we have in growing up. Delays us ever becoming a kinder, nicer, more functional society. Yeah, that's sad too. People who seem to care, but they haven't grown up enough that their caring becomes kind of a badge of honor that they wear and makes them arrogant and self-righteous. And actually, they're not really that caring either. They're acting caring. They're not really caring because it's not about others so much as they claim. Oh, it's about, I feel so bad about those other people. Really, they feel bad that life isn't the way they want it to be. It's more about self. Because if it's really about those other people, they realize the best way they could fix them is to fix themselves. Help educate others. Be positive. Positive, 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 because that'll help the whole world get more positive.
Yeah. And from the right place. All right. Well, this has been a good show.
Yeah. Oh, they're all good shows.
I know, right?
Whatever it is we happen to get into, it's always a good show. Because these are things that a lot of people are struggling with.
They are.
You know, they're struggling with this. They're dealing with this. And in their minds, it seems like if you had a heart, you'd have to be angry.
Right.
They don't understand that anger is dysfunctional. And a whole bunch of angry people, you know, well, if we were all really, really angry, we could fix this thing. So let's make everybody angry about this. You know, we'll send out emails that says, you realize you're being ripped off and, you know, trying to make people angry.
Right.
Well, if you get enough people angry, you have a mob. Yeah. And whenever you have a mob, everything usually isn't better afterwards. You know, once you get a mob going, then everything is usually even worse afterwards. Mobs do not do a lot of constructive work. They just, you know, end up venting their anger at whatever the symbol is of their displeasure, and it doesn't really change anything. You've just created a bunch of less grown people, right. A bunch of people who've just de-evolved because they've spent their time being angry. Now, next time we start at a lower place. Yeah, mob isn't the solution. Getting more people angry about your cause is not a good way to go.
Yeah.
But that's how we control people, is with fear. Right. So if you want to control somebody, you control them with fear. So all the marketers want to control how we spend our money by making us afraid. Oh, you know, if you don't buy this product, you know, your life will be terrible, or nobody will like you, or you need this. And they try to make us buy things because of fear.
Yeah.
And so do the politicians try to make us buy their ideas with fear. If you don't vote for me, you know, your life will be terrible, and all the horrible things that these other people are doing, and they just make up stuff so that they frighten people. And the conspiracy theories, it's all about fear, frightening people into joining your cause. But you don't get anything with frightened people other than a mob, and mobs are always dysfunctional. Even if the mob that cut off Marie Antoinette's head at the end of the French Revolution, well, what did they end up with? Napoleon. You see, it just isn't. It doesn't work. The only way to end up with a good, kind, gentle, caring society is to be gentle, kind, and caring.
All right. Well, you've heard it here. This is where we're headed. All right. Well, it has been. I've enjoyed this show just because it brought up a lot of stuff that a lot of people have been struggling with. So I think this is a good place to stop and revamp for next month. You've been listening to News for the Heart. We've been getting to the heart of what matters with Tom Campbell, and I'm not sure what we'll be calling this, but it'll be an interesting, maybe Q&A, virtual reality. I don't know.
No.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
Have a question for Laurie and want to be on the next News from the Heart show? Drop us a line via instant feedback at bmajor.org. News from the Heart is brought to you by Intuitive Soul and is produced by Major Radio for Clear Channel's iHeartRadio and bmajor.org.